So the verse says, verse 18, let's say I'm looking at verse 18 or verse 17. Verse 17 on chapter 2 in the Art Scroll, it's also verse 17, page 299. The shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and saved them and watered their sheep, the sheep of the daughters of Midian, the daughters of the priest of Midian. The shepherds, verse 18, they came to Reuel, their father. He said, how could you come so quickly today? What's the Hebrew? Madua. Madua is why. Here the English translate is how. Let's see what the Mitzuda and Chabad says. Madua, why? It's interesting. Why? But why are you so early? It's not like I didn't want you home. It's like he's surprised they're able to come home early. So apparently this harassment that the daughters of Reuel would experience in the hands of the other shepherds was a normal ongoing thing, wasn't unusual. So now that they were able to water their sheep because they got help from the outsider, so now he's surprised, how could this happen? So why, first of all, why did they harass the girls? So was it they were anti-Semites, or were they chauvinists? So it's interesting. Rashi says that the reason why they chased them away is because we keep referring to him as Kohen Midian, the priest of Midian. And Rashi says Kohen is priest, the greatest. Rashi says Kohen could be the leader, but apparently it seems that he was the leader of their religion or their idol worshiping clan. And then he separated from the idol worship. He realized that it's not the truth. So he separates. And because of that, they almost like excommunicate him. So he's offended. So they don't like him because of his theology. That's what Rashi says. But I think earlier in the Torah, you see that the male shepherds don't like competition from the woman. And you see that where else? You see that with, where else do you see it? No, you just see it here, right? You just see it here. Yeah, you see it here. So maybe that's what it was. But Rashi says it was the fact that he was, because the Torah keeps emphasizing he's Kohen, he's the priest. And meanwhile, we see the Torah, he comes to the Jewish people when they're in the desert. So the priest could be, if he was really the priest, and these are the daughters of the priests, would they be mistreated? Right? It's hard to believe the daughters of the priest would be mistreated. So Rashi says priest is ex-priest. In other words, he was the priest. He was the most prominent in theology, but then he separated from the idol worship, and that is what offends them. Yes.
Is there in modern or ancient Hebrew the word ex, like ex-con? Can you say that in modern Hebrew?
Not really. In biblical Hebrew,
Modern Hebrew.
In modern Hebrew, you could say X. You know how you say X in Hebrew? You say X. Yes.
That's what people say in television.
Yeah.
And in biblical Hebrew?
Biblical Hebrew, no.
So you don't say like Kohen Shavar?
You could say it. You could say in the Mishnah, you say it. And there is a Kohen Shavar, Kohen that is passed, but been removed. You could say it, but it's in the Mishnah. You don't see it. It's not in the Tanakh. I mean, it would be more like you raise him and you bring him down. You would say that so he's been brought down, but you need another word. But this idea that you're presenting him as a priest, you're presenting him as a prominent person, and in the same context, you're saying that his daughters are being harassed is strange. So if he was prominent, why are they being harassed? So Rashi's solution is he is prominent, but that's why they were so offended at him. In other words, because he's so prominent, if a guy at the end of town doesn't come to the house of worship on Sunday morning, it's not that offensive. But if the priest forgot to show up and the priest says we don't have to serve the idols, then that the fact that he's a Kohen, the fact that he's a priest, is the cause for the animosity, the cause for the hatred.
Is it sexual harassment?
It could be, and I wouldn't say it's sexual, but I would say it could be. It's also if they were males, misogynist, right? If they would defend themselves, then the story may have been different. So Moshe, one guy, could stand up to all the. Maybe he was as strong, maybe he was mighty. Okay, but
so also one thing I never understood the story. So Jethro, he's surprised that they're home early,
right?
So he knows this is going to happen. Right. You take in preventative bodyguards or whatever.
So maybe he didn't have the ability, right? Maybe in Rashi uses strong terms. Rashi says he was in nidui. Nidui is almost like, it's not as harsh as cherem, but it's a form of excommunication. In other words, people didn't want to associate with him. So I don't know if he called the security company. I don't know if they would take the job, right?
And
So
he wouldn't leave town.
he wouldn't leave town.
Why would he leave town if he was in?
That neither, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know why he didn't leave town. I don't know. Yeah, now maybe it's not so easy to move. I don't know. Maybe, yeah.
Do we know if Jethro had sons?
Later, I don't know. I know that he had descendants, and his descendants, actually, some of them moved to Israel and the surrounding areas. And there was a story when, in the book of prophets, in the book of Judges, when Devorah goes to battle with Sisera, and Sisera is the general of the Canaanite king, Yavin. So before they go to battle, they tell the Cani, which is a family who were not Jewish, but descendants of Jethro, and they say they live next to the Amalekites, sort of southern Jordan. And it wasn't Amalekites. It was, I'm getting the exact locations confused, but they basically say, move out of the way because we're coming to attack Sisera, coming to attack the enemy. And in fact, the woman who killed Sisera, Yael, she was the wife of a man who was the Cani. So Cani is the descendants of Reuel, if I'm not mistaken, of Jethro, if I'm not mistaken. So he did have descendants, and did have tribes that descended from him. Was it male? I don't know. May have been, but at least at that time, I would say no. Maybe they had younger children that had to grow into the role. The short answer is, I don't know. And that's the right answer because I don't know. So it's right that I don't know. Can't go wrong. If I said I know and I'm wrong, that's the wrong answer. But if I say I don't know, that's right. I don't know. Okay, Vicky, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. My question was actually similar to Niels and Steve's. I had a problem with the fact that, first of all, Jethro was sending daughters to the well, knowing that they will be harassed.
Right.
So,
So harass.
and then maybe he didn't know. Maybe they just came earlier because the sheep was watered quickly. Because I do have problem with that. It was a regular thing, and he was still
You have a problem with that because you're a modern woman living in the modern world. But if someone told the woman in the past, or told the foreigner in the past, to wait to the back of the line, it's not unheard of. It's not unheard of. That's essentially what they're saying. It doesn't mean they physically assaulted them. What it means, you wait for the back of the line. You can't come and water the sheep. We chase you away. Once all the shepherds go home, then you can come. And then Moshe sees that, and Moshe sees that's like you. Moshe's offended by that. He's offended by the fact that they have to wait for they're here first and they have to wait for the end. He's offended by that, and he can't tolerate it, and he gets himself into trouble and he gets involved. That's what Moshe does. Usually parents tell their kids stay out of trouble. Moshe is no, he's always going to get involved put himself in the center of the injustice. So the point here is that, like I said, I don't think it was so unheard of to say we leave. I don't know that it was so severe. In other words, so you wait for the back of the line. It's not unheard of, right? Jewish people many times have lived in societies and they were second-class citizens. So why should you leave? Why would leave? But I don't know if someone else would be better. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But it's not, it's not, I don't know that for us, it's offensive. And for Moshe, it's offensive. Maybe we got it from Moshe. But the bottom line is, I could make a thing that you're going to move, you're going to sell your house, the interest rates are up. I don't know if it's the right time. You're going to get a new mortgage. But okay, so you'll wait for the end of the line. What they say in Yiddish, nicht gefährlich. It's not terrible, so you can make peace with it. Moshe cannot make peace with it.
Yeah. So why read so deep into it? I mean, it's just maybe just because they were.
Yeah. But again, the question is the Torah is telling you that he's a Kohen, that he's a priest,
It's just
prominent. Now the question is, so why is the Torah telling this to you? So Rashi says, because we have a problem. It seems like it's opposites. The prominent would mean there would be a reason not to respect them. And then we say that the shepherds are chasing them away. So if you want to put those two factors together, those two pieces of information together, maybe the fact that he's a Kohen, he's a priest, actually intensifies the antagonism that they have to his family, right? And the reason would be is that he was the priest and he separated from them. separated from idol worship. And the Medrash goes on in other places when it talks about how he came to the Jewish people in the desert, that he actually tried every idol worship, every idol in the world, right? He went to study comparative religion. He went and he said, I'm gonna try every religion, and he was unsatisfied. And then that's why he came to the desert, because then he said that then he recognized the true God. And there's actually a very interesting Zohar. The Zohar says Torah could not, because the story of Jethro coming to the Jewish people is the beginning of the parsha of the giving of the Torah. In fact, the parsha of the giving of the Torah is called Yisro, Jethro, which is strange. Call it the parsha of the Ten Commandments, call it the parsha of the Torah. Meanwhile, we're calling it Jethro. So a guy showed up, who cares? Okay, says Moshe's father-in-law, who cares? So the Zohar makes the point. The Zohar says Torah cannot be given until Jethro comes and thanks God. Because what does Jethro represent? Jethro represents the accumulated knowledge and philosophy and theology of the time. Because he's the master, he was the expert. And when he recognizes that everything that they knew up to that point was not correct, now the world is open to receive the Torah. Because the Torah is not supposed to be superimposed from above, right? God can come and enforce his will, but that's not what the Torah is about. Torah is about the human being, the people discovering the truth. That's why Abraham, God only appears to him when he's 75, right? Initially, he discovers God on his own. And the same thing with the Torah as a whole, says the Zohar, that only when Jethro, who's the expert in theology and philosophy, and Jethro says, now I know that God is the Lord. He says in a very interesting verse, and that's what the Zohar that's what the Medrash focuses on. He says, now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. How do you know all the gods? He tried every one? Yeah, he tried every one. That's why it says, that's what the verse says. Now I know, right? It's a very ambitious, I don't know if ambitious is the right word, but it's a very, I don't know what the word is. Like, he's making a big claim. He's making a big claim. He said, ambition? Yeah, okay, ambitious claim. He says, where are we? I'll tell you that. It's 11, page 397. He comes and he praises God and he says, now I know that Hashem is greater than all the gods. All the gods? Every last one? Says the Medrash, yeah, every last one, because he tried every last one. Yeah, Rashi quotes it from the Mechilta. Malamed, this teaches that Jethro was makir. He recognized every idol worship in the world. He did not leave an idol that he didn't serve. That's
maybe the fact that Moses showed him how would somebody believing in one God behave towards other people. Maybe that
was the impressive, right? Maybe that's what made what he hears what God. He basically hears that God stands up for the oppressed. If we're not there yet. We're only in Exodus chapter 2. When we get to Exodus 18, we talk about what he heard that motivated him to come. Essentially, he heard that God took the people out of Egypt. Essentially, that could mean different things. But it could be read to be that God stands up for the oppressed. Could also mean that God is involved in nature. I'm not sure exactly what he understood, what he didn't. We'll get to that when we get to chapter 18. Way ahead of me. I'm only chapter 2, so I don't know the end of the story. But that could be. He sees Moshe stands up for the oppressed. He sees God stands up for the oppressed. Because remember, in the ancient world, Pharaoh says he's the God. Pharaoh says that God endorses the hierarchy of slavery. God endorses the system where people who are lower on the hierarchy are serving the nobles and ultimately the kings. And that's what that's what the monarchs use. They use the name of God to enslave and subjugate people. And this starts at the first king. The first king mentioned in the Torah is Nimrod. In Genesis, before we read about Abraham, we read about the Tower of Babel. It says Nimrod was the first one. He was the Gibor Tzad. He was a mighty hunter. And it says he was a Gibor Tzad. He was mighty hunter before Hashem. What does it mean before Hashem? It's a very strange explanation. So some commentators, if I think Rabbi Shamshon Fal Hirsch, I may be wrong, say that he used the name of Hashem to create the concept of the monarchy. He says that because God made me powerful, God endorses my ability, my right to rule. And of course, Abraham comes and rebels against the king. And wherever Abraham works, we talked about this in the book of Genesis, wherever Abraham shows up, there's rebellion. the battle of 4 kings against the 5 kings. The 5 kings are subjugated to the 4 kings. You have a small little area of land. You have multiple kings, multiple layers of kings. There's a hierarchy within the kings. Everybody is serving the next guy. And Abraham shows up to the scene and everyone starts rebelling, right? What happened? Because up till then there's a system, until monarchies always said throughout up to the revolutions in the 18th century, the monarchs always said, we have the divine right to rule, right? So God was used as a way of allowing the monarchy to oppress and allowing the system of government to oppress. And here Moshe comes and is not afraid to stand up for the oppressed and flip the hierarchy. And God is doing the same. God is breaking the system of the hierarchy. And that's what he hears, and that's what he shows up. So it ties into the same story.
It was enough for him to give his daughter to Moses. Just
right. Well, that was right in the beginning, right? It's interesting. You say, why didn't he leave? It says ultimately he went back he goes to the Jewish people, and Moshe tries to convince him to come to Israel in the book of Numbers. And he says, no, he's going back. So he went back to his land. And he says, I'm going to go to my birthplace and my land. And it's not clear. Why doesn't he want to come with the Jewish people if he was so moved and so inspired? And the Rashi's interpretation from the Medrash or from the Talmud, I don't remember. Rashi's interpretation is he goes because he wants to convert the people of his nation. In other words, he feels moral responsibility to teach the teachings of monotheism to his people. He doesn't say, I've seen the light, I'm going to escape. He says, I feel connected to my birthplace. I feel the responsibility to the people I grew up with. And therefore, even though he separated from them theologically, and he rejected the idols, and I want to say excommunicated, but nidui is a form of excommunication, a lesser form. But he still did not want to abandon them. So maybe that's why he didn't go. And that's impressive, because he understands that if I'm from a certain area, I have moral responsibility for that culture. And especially if he was a priest, so he was a person of prominence and a person that was able to preach and influence people. He didn't want to escape to the land of Israel. He says, I'm going back. So that's interesting.
But he failed.
It fails to how much, to what degree? I'm sure there are
Because in the
degrees.
Book of Numbers, and later on, the Midianites.
United attack. Yeah.
The enemy of Israel.
Yeah, it's the enemy of Israel. So the question is, did he fail completely? Did he influence some people? And the question is, do you have to succeed or do you have to try? That's a separate question, right? Is our job to be successful or is our job to try? There's two different measures. Sometimes you have to be successful because the job has to get done, but sometimes you do your part. The ethics of the fathers say something beautiful. They say, upon you is not the work to finish, meaning you don't have to finish the work. You don't have to finish the job. Don't say, I'm not going to start because it's too grand, so I can't finish. But you're not free to be batelimana, to ignore it. In other words, you can't say the job is too big. I'm not going to do it at all. Right? So that's the point, is everybody has to do their part. Whether or not you'll be successful and you conclude, or somebody else in a later time in history will continue what you started, that's not necessarily up to you. So maybe that's part of the thing. Moshe maybe understood the insight into the land, and he felt that Jethro will not be successful and he should come to Israel. I'm not saying who was right and who was wrong, but there's certainly this tension between Moshe and Jethro. Moshe tries, he says no, and then Moshe insists again to bring him back, and Jethro refuses to. And the rabbis look at that as a positive view. He's not going home because he doesn't want to connect to the Jewish people. He's going home because he wants to spread the mission. Now, was he right? Was it a good judgment? Was it a bad judgment? Was it ultimately, in hindsight, would that be the best judgment? Would he be successful? We don't know. But was clearly not taking up. We could have said another narrative. We could have said, Jethro, he came to the Jewish people. He saw, he was not impressed. He went home. That's not the narrative we take, right? We say, no, he went, and then he decided, and then he was moved, and he wanted to spread the knowledge.
But this, going back to something you said quite a while ago now. You said Abraham comes to religion when he's ready, when he's prepared.
Yes.
But we also have a midrash that when Moses goes to Mount Sinai, that God holds the Mount Sinai over the Jewish people, accept it or I'll drop it on your head.
Yes.
So that's not.
You always have the
that's not
concept. Yeah, you always have the concept of this balance between accepting, not doing it because it makes sense to me. Because ultimately, if the foundation is because it makes sense to me, then my mind can tell me, I could justify anything. I could justify murder. I could justify genocide. right? So there has to be idea of we're submitting to a morality that's above us, right? So even though the Ten Commandments are logical, at least most of them, right? They're logical. Do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery. The Medrash says if the Torah would not be given, we could learn these ways of life from the animal kingdom. So the Medrash says. Medrash says the cat is modest. I don't know. I don't have any cats. That's what the Medrash says. The Medrash says that we would learn not to steal from the nimala, from the ant. Apparently, ants don't steal from each other. I don't know, but that's what the Medrash says. So the point is, you could look at nature. In other words, you could come up with a philosophy of morality, and you don't need the Torah. You don't need God to tell you not to kill. You could come up with a philosophy that says don't kill. It's a bad idea for everybody, right? So you could have a humanistic morality. However, the shortcoming is that if it's all based on human understanding, then and no commitment to something greater than the human mind, then the human mind could easily manipulate it and say, well, we at this time we think that genocide is a good idea, right? The 20th century, the most sophisticated nation in the world and advanced philosophically and technologically does the genocide, and they justify it. Right. So Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about he had a great philosopher. He had a great teacher when he was in the University of Berlin, the great philosopher. I forget the guy's name. And when that person ultimately, when the Nazis came to power, I guess, I don't know, for philosophical reasons, but for reasons of convenience, he joined the party. And forever he was shaken. He couldn't understand how his teacher, who was this great philosopher, could buy into this nonsense. So the point is, if you're going to, So if you're going to rely only on your mind, then there's no morality. So you have to have the idea of that, yes, I'm accepting, God is going to force me to accept, do not commit murder, do not steal. Having said that, was it logical for them? Yes. And some people say, why was the Torah not given at the dawn of civilization? Why wasn't the Torah given to Adam? Why wasn't the Torah given to Noah? We don't know the answer, but one interpretation is because the Torah is given when the values of the Torah make sense to the people. So we're doing both. We're having it both ways. On one hand, much of the Torah makes sense. On the other hand, we say we don't do it because it makes sense. We commit to something higher, and that's why in the Torah there are also things that don't make sense. So we have both, but it's not to say that the Torah would come to primitive people who Cain, for him it makes perfect sense to kill his brother. The world is not ready for that yet. The world is not ready for the Torah. The world is ready for the Torah when the values of the Torah are become more popular. And maybe the Torah cannot be given until Abraham. But the Medrash says, the Zohar says Jethro, but Jethro is the Jethro is the one that's not unobvious. But certainly without Abraham, which is obvious, he went and called in the name of God and he spread the knowledge of God in that region. Right, so we're talking about generations of people preaching monotheism. Then the Torah could be given because then people are open to hear it. So in other words, the model is not only, it's a marriage. A marriage, you would have both parties. You have Hashem and you have the people, and you have to have some sort of partnership. If it's completely superimposed from above, then it's not what we're looking for.
Yes, I don't know if it's too hard a question. There's a midrash that says that Jethro and Job went in front of
Pharaoh. Yeah.
What is that midrash, and how does this connect with
Yeah.
this?
I have to look into that. They gave the Pharaoh the medrash that says that Jethro was one of the people who gave advice to Pharaoh to subjugate the Jewish people.
Right.
But so I don't know if it's literally, but the bottom line is that was before his transformation, obviously. Right, that's before the transformation. So in other words, what Jethro and the philosophy of Midian represents, they represent this idea. The old model of Jethro would be that Judaism is a threat, monotheism is a threat to the system of government, and therefore you have to their system of government, and therefore to the monarchy, and therefore you have to oppress the Jewish people. But that would represent Jethro when he was still the priest, before he is disillusioned. I'm not going to say recognize God. He didn't recognize God yet, not till later, but enough to be disillusioned by what he knew.
So then in our language, you would say that Jethro has a less profound moment?
I think so. And he picks up and he goes to the desert.
Maybe he's from the desert.
No, he goes to the Sinai desert, which is far into the desert. It's neighboring, but he picks up and he goes. Yeah.
So,
But he goes back.
So to this point, where's Midian then? It's not.
So
in the
Midian
Sinai?
is now with southern Jordan, not in the Sinai.
It's not in the Sinai.
Yeah. It's close by. It could be a 4 or 5 day walk, but the point is, it's in the wilderness. Nobody's going to live there. Nobody's going to live there. When Moshe goes to Sinai, it says that he found. We'll read it next page. That he went achar hamidbar, achar sort of after the desert, behind the desert. It could be deep into the desert. And Rashi says, the Medrash says that he takes the sheep there because he doesn't want the sheep eating from pasturing in land that belongs to people. So he wants to be safe. So he goes up to a place where there's no ownership. He goes to a place that's sort of deep into the desert, far from civilization. So it doesn't have to be far when you're living in the border between civilization and desert. Not that southern Jordan is such a watered area, but you're not going to go there unless you have a reason to. It's not the natural place to go to.
So the Jews ever called their children Jethro?
Not that I remember. Not
Because
that I
we
know.
call our children
Ishmael,
Ishmael, right?
which is funny because we don't have so
We have a
much.
famous rabbi.
Yeah,
Ishmael.
but today it's not so common. Not only today, the last 1,000 years, I don't know how common it is.
But it's in the.
It's in the Mishnah, of course. One of the greatest rabbis, Rabbi Akiva's colleague, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. These are the two.
So Ishmael
philosophers.
is a convert in that scenario?
Yeah, he was not a convert. It's a beautiful name chosen by God. Who gave Hagar the name, the command or the direction to name her son Yishmael? It was the angel. Beautiful name, Yishmael. God should hear. Chosen by the angel. Beautiful name. Why it's not common today, I don't know.
Back then, wasn't it like calling your son Osama?
I don't think so, because I don't think at that point, the oppression didn't come from the Muslims. There was no Islam then, right? There was not much oppression taking place. The oppression was from the descendants of Asaph, from the Romans. In the days of Rabbi Akiva was killed by the Romans. Romans were seen as descendants, either literal or figurative descendants of Asaph.
You say Hagar named him. How do we know?
Well, the story tells us, the Torah tells us that she runs away she becomes pregnant. And then Sarah starts oppressing her because Sarah basically gives her a hard time because she was, didn't respect Sarah. So Sarah oppresses her. So she runs out to the desert. And the Torah says the angel tells her exactly what to do. So I don't have to say from memory. It's too early in the morning for me to remember anything. So I'll look inside. If you look at page 71, look at page 7, I'll read it. So verse 6, let's say we can start chapter 16, verse 6, we could start anywhere, but Abraham said to Sarai, behold, your maidservant is in your hand. Do to her as you see fit. And Sarai dealt harshly with her, so she fled from her. Verse 7, an angel of Hashem found her by the spring of water in the desert, found Hagar at the spring on the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, maidservant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I am running away from Sarai, my mistress. And an angel of Hashem said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself to her domination. And an angel of Hashem said to her, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they will not be counted for abundance. Verse 11, and an angel of Hashem said to her, behold, you will conceive and give birth to a son. You shall name him Yishmael, for Hashem has heard your prayer. Yishmael, Yishma, like Shema, listen, El, God, beautiful. What kind of the most beautiful name I could think of? Maybe if I have another son, I'll name him Ishmael. No, maybe, I don't know. But I'm just saying it's a beautiful name, but I haven't seen anyone. Now I don't have to Google this actually. Has anyone been named Yishmael the last 1,000 years? I don't know. But certainly in times of the Mishnah, Yishmael was high priest. There was a Yishmael, the high priest, Kohen Gadol, and he was the colleague of Rabbi Akiva. So beautiful name.
Going back to our current story, there's no Jews named Jethro.
Yeah, Yitro. Yeah, I don't know. Not common now, but in the
Because
past.
here in Israel, people named Nimrod.
Yeah, but Nimrod means rebel, and that was a way of rebelling against the tradition, because maybe they don't know it now, but a generation or two ago, like Nimrod in the Medrash is the first one to rebel against Hashem.
I thought he said he used God. He said before
He
God.
used God to pull people away from God. In other words, initially he says, to use God to make himself an idol. He presents himself as the idol. And in the Medrash, he's the villain. In the Medrash, he's the guy, he's the person that battling Abraham. He tries to kill Abraham. In the Medrash, Nimrod is someone rebelling against Hashem. But if you are a Zionist and you're trying to create the new Jew and you're trying to rebel against the exiled Jew, so it's a beautiful name. Now today, when people name their kids Nimrod, they may not know the origin, but at some point people knew the origin, and that was a sign of rebellion. Which the name Nimrod is rebellion. So it fits.
Does Nimrod also mean rebellious?
Yeah,
that a
I
thing in
mean, it
Like an adjective?
Nimrod, yeah, not
How would
Nimrod,
you say
but
you had a
Nimrod.
rebellious childhood? What would be the word?
Mardani is the modern
Mardani.
way of saying it, but the root is not Mored. Mored is to rebel. Mored is yeah.
In speaking of names, I've often wondered why more Jewish children are not named Khaled.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kid. There are kids that there are some.
It's a very beautiful name.
I'm studying with a boy now for his bar mitzvah. Caleb, yeah, Caleb.
I mean, you hear that name a lot from the Christian.
Yeah.
Just on that point.
Yeah.
Why is one of our heroes, Caleb, named Dog? I don't get it.
Well, it's a different word. It's a different word. It's a different.
Caleb,
It's
same way.
the same letters. The punctuation makes the same. Now, also, maybe Caleb, maybe dog is not necessarily so bad. If Caleb is like lev, is like heart, emotion. So in other words, it's not necessarily. But I don't think it's the same word. I think here the punctuation makes a difference. But if it's related, then it's comes from they both have lev, they both have hearts.
Caleb is Caleb. Caleb means dog in modern Hebrew. Maybe
Caleb.
ancient-
Caleb is a dog. Yeah.
Ancient Hebrew too.
Right. Yeah, it's in the Bible. When the Jewish people left Egypt, no dog barked. So it's in
That's
the
what
Exodus.
Telephone gets it.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But that's a famous story.
Yeah. So it's in the Torah. So they have
No
Caleb.
dog bark.
Yes, so we hold the dogs in the studio.
Yeah. So the Torah says that if you have a field of a piece of meat that's treif, and treif now claims to mean anything not kosher, but in biblical Hebrew, treif means that it was devoured. So an animal in the field was struck by an animal of prey. Okay, so the verse says, so now you can't eat it because it was killed by an animal. It wasn't killed. It was devoured by an animal. It was devoured by an animal, not killed through ritual slaughter. So the Torah says, if there's a meat in the field that's taref, so don't eat it, give it to the dog. That's what Steve is saying. Why the dog? It's other animals. Oh, we have to repay the dog. Right? That's what you're referring to. Yeah.
There's a bad joke.
Okay. We do bad jokes occasionally.
But it's somewhat
Okay.
How did the door get to the 20th floor of the upper building?
It took the elevator.
The elevator. Neil, I said it was
Grown.
Okay, you get a pass for one joke. One. Okay, we're gonna get overrun by the noise of the kids coming to study Torah, which is a beautiful noise that Hashem likes to hear. But I want to end up with what I started with, because everything here we got a little distracted, and that is Moshe. They say Moshe says Ish Mitzri Batomarna, verse 19 on page 229. They replied, an Egyptian man saved us from the shepherds, and he even drew water for us and watered the sheep. So that's a verse. It doesn't have to be it's not really a verse that Moshe said. It's a verse that the daughters told their father about Moshe. Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man, saved us from the shepherds. What do we do with this Egyptian man? So I printed out the Medrash. There's two Medrash. First Medrash says in this on this parsha on Shemot, the Medrash says something beautiful. The Medrash says it's actually a compliment. To be called an Egyptian man is a compliment. How so? So the Medrash is a beautiful contrast. Okay, we're being overrun. The Medrash is a beautiful continent. Okay, I'm going to try to say this very quickly, and we'll call it a day. Look at Noah. Noah starts, the Torah says, Ish Tzaddik, righteous man. At the end of his life, what does it say? After the flood, Noach began man of the earth. That's when he got drunk. So you go from righteous man,
Who's the Hebrew?
Ish Adamah. Ish Adamah. You go from righteous man to man of the earth. You go down. Moshe starts Ish Mitzri, Egyptian man, and becomes Ish Elohim, man of God. That's what it says at the end of the Torah in the last portion. This is the blessing that Moshe, man of God, spoke. So in other words, the Medrash is saying the fact that you highlight his Egyptian man is not putting him down. It's not saying he's an Egyptian, he's outsider, he's not a Jew. It's the opposite. It's the highlight how the transformation that Moshe undergoes from Egyptian man to man of God. That's a much better place than to go from righteous man to man of the earth. So it's not about what level you're on. It's about the trajectory or the orientation of where you're headed to. And that's why the Medrash says that is actually a compliment that the Torah refers to him as an Ish Mitzri Egyptian man, because contrast that with what he will become. Go ahead.
We assume that Moses is raised in the palace and had a proper Egyptian education.
Yes. Yeah.
Wouldn't that make him an Egyptian man?
Yeah. But the question is, the next Medrash that wants to be critical doesn't say Moshe presented himself as an Egyptian, but Moshe says, the Medrash complains that Moshe didn't protest. He didn't say, I look Egyptian, but I'm not Egyptian. Unlike Joseph. The Medrash that says that it's negative compares it to Joseph and says, very interesting thing. Joseph, both Moses and Joseph don't die in Israel. Joseph was brought, both Moses and Joseph did not die in Israel. Joseph died in Egypt, and Moshe died in the desert. Yet Hashem, the Jewish people, take Joseph's bones and bring him to the burial in Israel. Moshe is not buried in Israel. How come? So the Medrash says, why wasn't Moshe buried in Israel? Because when they said he's an Egyptian man, he didn't protest.
Oh,
That's what the Medrash says. Very powerful.
but
Now, 1 second. Joseph, when they said he's a Hebrew man, when they wanted to speak of him derogatory, they said he's a Hebrew man in Egypt, and he didn't deny it. So because he didn't deny the fact that they called him a Hebrew, he didn't deny it. That's why he was merited to be buried in the land of the Hebrews. Moshe says, they say he's an Egyptian man. He didn't protest. Now, in this story, he wasn't really there. Correct. That's why the other Medrash says,
Come to the Father. He might be outside.
correct. And that's why the other Medrash says it's positive. But you have to understand where the Medrash is written. The Medrash that's negative is not written on the story. It's trying to explain why Moshe wasn't buried in Israel. This Medrash is in Shemot. The positive Medrash is in Shemot. The negative Medrash is in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, trying to explain why Moshe wasn't buried in Israel.
Can we believe that Moshe was buried in Midian?
No, but it says he wasn't. No, but he wasn't buried in Israel because when people had the impression that he's an Egyptian man, he didn't protest it, so he didn't feel himself connected to the land. Joseph, when they called him a Hebrew, and that would be derogatory at the time, he could have said, "No, I'm not really a Hebrew. Maybe I'm a." He could have spun a tale, and he didn't.
But in both scenarios, they're both silent.
Correct, but the silent is sometimes when somebody says you're a Jew and you don't protest, and you have the incentive to protest, and you don't, then you're standing up for Judaism. If you want to blend in, someone says you're an Egyptian guy. Oh, you can assimilate. Very good. So someone says you're an Egyptian guy and you don't protest. It's a different story, right? So the question is, both were silent, but the question is, there's two different silence. One silence is when they call you a Jew and you're silent and you don't protest. And the other one is they call you when Jew is a Hebrew. And the other one is they call you an Egyptian and you don't protest. Now, Neil is right. He didn't call him an Egyptian to his face. But the bottom line is, he must have had some conversation with them, and they did not. Well, I don't know. That's the negative way of looking at it. The Hasidic way follows the first Medrash and basically talks about the fact that to celebrate the fact that Moshe, educated in Egypt, in the Pharaoh's palace, and then is an Egyptian man. He really is an Egyptian man, even though biologically he's a Jewish man. He's a Hebrew man, but he represents Egyptian culture. He grew up in the palace. And then for him to transform and become a Hebrew and become a servant of God, that is the greatest compliment that you can give him. So again, here is the two ways of reading the Medrash. Two ways of reading the Medrash, and you could pick which one you like.
There's a lot of comments where Moshe was buried.
Yes, but not in Israel.
And how he voted.
Correct. But also, It's not in Israel. I mean, they expanded Israel because the Jewish people conquered the land east of the Jordan. So in a way, he was buried amongst fellow Jews, but it's not Israel. And it's a very big problem. Nobody knows why Moshe was buried, even though Torah says it because he hit the rock. The rabbis, starting from the Medrash, are not comfortable with that. So they're looking for imagine you put a team of prosecutors to find all the sins of Moshe. We have to justify why he's not buried in Israel. And this is Exhibit A. In other words, if you want to find a reason why he's not buried in Israel, so that was the place that they're able to find. Someone called you an Egyptian, and you say, no, I'm not Jewish. They say a story about the Rebbe. The Rebbe's wife said the story that when the Rebbe was in France, when the Nazis invaded, and so they set up he was in Vichy, so they set up a puppet government. So everyone had to go in and register with the government, and they have to write their nationality or something. And the Rebbe didn't go, his wife went. Somebody went I think his wife went, and the nationality didn't write Jew. And the Rebbe heard about it, and the Rebbe went to the offices, said, I want my application back. And he said, and he put down Jew. Right? So this was the person he was not able to tolerate that somebody should say, think maybe you're not Jewish, even though he was Jewish, name was Schneerson, but they didn't fill in Jew, and he was like, no, you have to speak up. So that's the attitude the Medrash is looking for. The Medrash says you have to speak up. Someone thinks you're an Egyptian, you have to speak up. Joseph, look at Joseph. Joseph, they say he's a Hebrew. He's silent, doesn't deny it.
But you can have multiple identities. You could be an Egyptian
Correct.
Jew.
Correct. Egyptian Jew. That's how you read, right to left, left to right. So, but again, even Egyptian Jew, you're not denying it. Here, they didn't say he's a Hebrew Egyptian. He's a Hebrew Egyptian. Again, I'm not saying when you read this story, you're not going to read the story. The Medrash in Shemot, it's very interesting to think about this. There's two interpretations of the Medrash, but where the Medrash appears affects the type of interpretation you're going to get. When you're reading this story, there's no reason this story is a positive story. Look, the Egyptian man becomes the man of God, like the Medrash says. Starts with Ish Mitzri, Egyptian man, becomes the man of God. Whereas Noach starts as righteous man and becomes man of the earth, goes down. So this is like highlighting Moshe's growth. But then when you come to Moshe not being buried in Israel, now you say, well, maybe let's look back. Maybe there's another way of reading that story. Maybe that statement was offensive to Hashem. So you wouldn't get it from here, but once you see Moshe's not being buried in Israel, in hindsight, you have to reinterpret. Maybe there's a room for more of a negative interpretation. But the message for us is that no one should mistake us as a Jew, because no one should mistake us as being a Gentile. I heard the rabbi made a joke. I'll stop the recording because everyone has a bad joke. Everyone's entitled to a bad joke. So I'll say a bad joke.
I didn't get